And of course, Daniel gives him the answer. We move over to chapter 5, verse 22. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew this, and you've lifted yourself up against the master of the Shamayim, and they brought before you the vessels of his house, and you and your great men, your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you've praised the mighty ones of silver and of gold, bronze, of iron, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor know, but the Elah who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not made great. Now Daniel's being bold here because he knows this kingdom is at its end. Look at verse 30. It says, in that night Belshazzar, sovereign of the Kasdites, was slain. We should now be that bold also. In verse 25, we see Daniel saying, this is the writing that was inscribed, many, many techel upharsin. Other versions say, many, many techel parsin. Parsin, or here Upharsin, is Persia. And what it means is numbered, weighed, divided. And he goes on, the interpretation of the word many, Elah has numbered your reign and put an end to it. Techel, you have been weighed on the scales and found lacking. Perez, your reign has been divided and given to the Medites and the Parisians. That's the Medes and the Persians. And, again, with verse 30, that night Belshazzar, sovereign of the Kasdites, was slain. And Dariawesh, the Medite, took over the reign, being about 62 years old. There you see the fall of Babylon, not the destruction of Babylon, which is yet to come. You can see that in Isaiah chapters 13 and 14. But here the Persian Empire begins through Cyrus. You can see Isaiah chapter 44 verse 28. Chapter 6 opens with Daniel in the den of lions. At this point, Daniel is 83 years old. And you see chapter 6 opens up with Darius, Dariawesh. That's a title. It's not a name. Some believe that this is Cyrus or his son. For that we look at chapter 6 and verse 28. And it says, and this Daniel prospered in the reign of Dariawesh and in the reign of Kodesh the Parisian. That's the Persian. In chapter 2, verse 32 and on, we looked at Iraq, Babylon, which was gold, Iran, Persia, which is silver, Greece, bronze, Rome, iron, and the clay, meaning other nations. Here in chapter 7, we get into it a little more detail. But you have to understand, the book of Revelation covers all the empires throughout all of history. The difference in Daniel is the book of Daniel covers the empires that would follow Daniel's time. In chapter 6, verse 16, we see, then the sovereign gave orders, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the den of lions. But the sovereign spoke and said to Daniel, "Your Allah, whom you serve continually, he himself delivers you." Some here look at this as a model of Daniel being Israel, being preserved through the Great Tribulation. Now, chapter 7. There's a lot here. And I'm going to start by reading the first 10 verses, let's say. In the first year of Belshazzar, sovereign of Babel, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, giving a summary of the matters. Daniel spoke and said, "I was looking in my vision by night and saw the 4 winds of the Shamayim stirring up the great sea. And the 4 great beasts came up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I was looking until its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and it was given a man's heart. And see another beast, a second, like a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said this to it, 'Arise, devour much flesh.' After this I looked and saw another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and rule was given to it. After this I looked in the night visions and saw a 4th beast, fearsome and burly, exceedingly strong, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the rest with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was thinking about the horns, and then saw another horn, a little one, coming up among them, and 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots before it. And see, eyes like the eyes of a man were in this horn, and a mouth speaking greatness. I was looking until thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days was seated." That's Yahweh. "His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like clean wool. His throne was flames of fire, its wheels burning fire. A stream of fire was flowing and coming forth from his presence, and 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judge was seated, and the books were opened." Now, amazing vision. We're looking at chapter 7, but time-wise, this actually occurs between chapters 4 and 5. Daniel, when he had this vision, was 67 years old. He talks about the 4 winds of heaven. These are hostile forces. And when he says in verse 3, the 4 great beasts came up from the sea. The sea could refer to the Mediterranean Sea, although oftentimes the sea refers to nations, plural. But in verse 4, the first one's a lion with eagle's wings. This is Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. Next, second one is in verse 5. We see the bear with 3 ribs. That's Babylon. Are actually victories over Babylon, Egypt, and Libya. That's Persia. The 3 ribs are victories over Babylon, Egypt, and Libya. Next, the leopard in verse 6 with 4 heads. Alexander and 4 generals who took over, that's Greece. So the lion is Babylon, the bear is Persia, the 3 ribs are the victories over Babylon, Egypt, and Libya. The leopard is referring to Greece. The 4 heads could be the 4 generals that Alexander had. And then in verse 7, we see the iron teeth with 10 horns. That's Rome and, I don't know, perhaps the European Union. It's incomparable to all others. And, we look at Rome. It was around 476 AD. The Roman Empire broke into pieces. It was never conquered. That's why we refer to it as the revived Roman Empire. And the 10 horns, most think is the European Union. I don't know. In verse 8, Daniel says, I was thinking about the horns, and then I saw another horn, a little one, coming up among them, and 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots before it. This is why there are but 7 heads, because 3 out of these 10 were plucked out by the roots. And this 11th horn, the one is the Antichrist, the world leader. And bear in mind, it's possible that this Antichrist, more properly called the lawless one, or the Torahless one, is going to rule the whole world. It's possible that he rules the whole of the Middle Eastern world. The world may be referring to the Middle East. It's just something that comes to my mind as a possibility. So if you see this Antichrist, and he's not ruling the whole planet, but he's ruling everything over there in the Middle East, that might be enough to know who he is. And of course he's got a big mouth, speaking greatly or boastfully. He's a loud mouth. And where it says that these the 3 of the first horns are plucked out by the roots, in the original, or in the Hebrew, it means gradually. And Perry Stone, I admire Perry Stone's stuff. He says that chapter 11 reveals that the 3 which get uprooted will be Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. And he's pretty good at this stuff. He might be right. Something to watch. When we see in verse 9, we saw that his throne was flames of fire, its wheels burning fire. Look at my video about the wheels of Ezekiel. That's important information. Everybody always thinks, oh, UFOs. No, you have to understand the Hebrew. It's talking about cycles. Check out my video on Ezekiel's wheels, and I'll leave it at that. And then we saw at the end of verse 10, the judge was seated and the books were opened. Revelation chapter 10, the book of life, the book of laws, the book of evil deeds, the book of wars, the book of remembrance. There are many books in Shamayim. We move over to verse 13. I was looking in the night visions and I saw one like the Ben of Enosh. Ben means son. Enosh. Coming with the clouds of the Shamayim. That's, I believe that's referring to Yeshua. And he came to the Ancient of Days. The Ancient of Days is Yahweh. And they brought him near before him. And to him was given rulership and esteem and a reign, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His rule is an everlasting rule. We know who that is. That's Yeshua. And which shall not pass away, and his reign that which shall not be destroyed. That's the second coming being spoken of here. And as for me, Daniel, my spirit was pierced within my body, and the visions of my head alarmed me. The Hallelujah Scriptures gets it right there. Other versions say that, I was troubled in my spirit. Now, the Hebrew means he was alarmed. And again, we see a mouth that speaks boastfully in verse 20. Concerning the 10 horns that were on his head, and the other that came up, before which 3 fell. This horn which had eyes, and a mouth which spoke greatness, or boastfully, a loud mouth. Look at Revelation chapter 13, verse 7. Look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. Because in verse 21 we see, I was looking, and this horn was fighting against the Kodeshim, and was prevailing against them. That's the Kodeshim, the dedicated ones. Most Bibles say the saints. And here, what I'm pointing out with Revelation chapter 13, verse 7, Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, we see that the saints and the called out ones, the church, are 2 very different groups. Yeshua says, the gates of hell will not prevail over my called out ones. And we see that Satan prevails over the saints. The saints are not the called out ones. The saints are believers, or the Kodeshim here, these are dedicated ones, but they're not called out. Many are called, few are chosen. They're not the chosen ones. In chapter 7, verse 20, at the end of verse 25, you see time, times, and half a time. I covered this in Revelation, and time, times, and half a time. Time, times, and half a time equals 3.5 years. It's a way of saying 3.5. Time is 1, times is 2, and of course half a time is half of 1. So, chapter 8, you see Daniel's vision of a ram and a goat. This is prior to chapter 5. Daniel was 69 years old at this point. The ram with 2 horns are the Medes and Persians. One of the horns was longer than the other. That's Persia. Verse 5 talks about a goat with a prominent horn. That's Greece. And verses 6 and 7, we're looking at Alexander the Great. This kid, and I say a kid, he was only 18 years old. He conquered the entire known world in just a few years. 18 years old, man. It's unbelievable. And when he finished and he saw that there was no more to conquer, he threw himself down and wept. I mean, he was on some kind of roll. He died before he was 33, gave his empire to his 4 generals. We mentioned that earlier. We see here in verse 8 of chapter 8. And the male goat became very great, but when he was strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it 4 conspicuous ones came up toward the 4 winds of the Shamayim. And from one of them came a little horn, which became exceedingly great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the splendid land. That, of course, in other versions says the beautiful land, that's Israel. Yisrael. Out of them came another horn, that's Syria. When we look at the second half of verse 11, verse 11 reads, "It even exalted itself as high as the prince of the host, and it took that which is continual away from him," that's Elohim, "and threw down the foundation of his Mikdash." Mikdash is the sanctuary. "And because of transgression, an army was given over to oppose that which is continual, and it threw the truth down to the ground, and it acted and prospered." This was the second abomination of desolation. Both occurred on December 25th, aka the 9th of Av. Could do a whole study on the 9th of Av. Terrible things always happen to Israel on that date. And then in verse 13, "I heard a certain Kodeshi speaking." Kodesh means dedicated. Kodeshi means my dedicated one. And another Kodeshi said to that certain one who was speaking, "Till when is the vision concerning that which is continual, and the transgression that lays waste, to make both the Kodesh place and the host to be trampled underfoot?" And he said to me, "For 2,300 evening, morning, and then that which is Kodesh shall be made right." Other versions say the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. This is a dual fulfillment. You can see Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, Daniel 9:27. Let me just pop over there and read that one, which is, "He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week." That's the Torahless one, the Antichrist. "And in the middle of the week he'll put an end to slaughtering and meal offering." That means the temple has to be rebuilt, and they're doing sacrifices again, Israel. "And on the wing of abominations he shall lay waste even until the complete end, and that which is decreed is poured out on the one who lays waste." That's a dual fulfillment here in chapter 8, verse 13 and 14. But if we move on, we're going to see a vision that reveals a third future offense. But first, in verse 16 of chapter 8, we see the first mention of Gabriel. "I heard a man's voice between Ulai, who called and said, 'Gabriel,